Greetings and welcome back, everyone. It's been a while since we've been able to upload any videos to YouTube here. We've been having some camera trouble, particularly with the microphone, and trying to get that squared away, trying to get rid of the squelching sounds on a budget here. And without a full setup studio at all times, it can be a little difficult. So I actually had this video recorded months ago. I did a full breakdown. It was about 2 hours long of the four cool rule book. I wanted to do like kind of a Q&A and things like that that would commonly come up. And the file corrupted on me because the forces of chaos and their dark mechanicum allies continue to just thwart every possible means to get YouTube going on a regular basis. So, what I would like to do today is I'm going to start going through the core rulebook section by section. This is a living rulebook, so it is subject to changes, though at this point it has had any significant changes have been done a long time ago. Instead of forcing codexes to fit specifically in our rulebook, we're adapting the rulebook to the codexes to allow as much lore and army flavor as possible for each of the factions. So anyways, I've gone through, you'll find on our website here, just called the Alternate 40K Core Rulebook. It's been set up with a table of contents to break down a little easier to find things. You'll find periodically I have wording changed to purple, and that is to recommend just to as a kind of Q&A, not a normal thing. First time going through, you can probably ignore it. If you're looking for a weird clarifier, you're probably going to want to look for the purple wording. Trying to make this as easy as possible for a breakdown. We're about halfway done with all the codexes at this point. Most of those are published or about to be very soon, hoping the end of this week that I'm recording this video. And when that's completely done, we'll do a full last proper breakdown of the codex of the core rulebook, and I'm going to put it into a even more user-friendly format that I would like to do with a lot of bullet points, that kind of thing. But we'll go ahead and get into it. This first segment here is going to be just the what is alternate 40k rules and the command phase. So 40k alternate 40k rules is just something we did because we got a bit tired of dealing with Games Workshop and the rule balance. I've been playing since 4th edition in 40k. Unrelated, I've also been playing Warhammer Fantasy since their 4th edition. I quit Fantasy after when Age of Sigmar came out. I did not appreciate the change of play. I really didn't like 8th edition either because it was just such a different take on the game, and it got away from a lot of the tactical and strategy that I enjoyed. 40k I've enjoyed most editions I've played. 8th edition was pretty rough. It kind of was a copycat of like 3rd. Really roughly done. And then 9th was when 9th released, we were majorly disappointed, and we started this project. So for those who are not a veteran gamer, what happened is Games Workshop had a very good team for a long time. Solid playtesters. They had a working system that had been in place for a very long time as well for point formulas, and everything was rigorously tested. I can only speak from my experience. I only got to play a few games of 4th edition due to budgets. So 4th edition was very technical and crunchy. It had really cool things. Like, for example, the Catachan jungle fighters for the Imperial Guard had ability to ignore the first 12 inches of wood line. And this is back in the day when I believe 2 inches was your max visibility into any brush. And it made it really cool that the Catachans could see through this because they're supposed to be these experienced jungle fighters, and of course it was abused with heavy weapons and snipers that could shoot and you couldn't return fire. I didn't get to see too much of the competitive side of that, of course. Very quickly, by the time I was able to play consistently and found players near me and got more of an army at that point, beyond a couple of units, 5th edition rolled around. 5th edition was solid. It was a really good system. It was simple. It was streamlined. There weren't any regiment rules or anything like that. But it did bring a nice polish to the game. It played fairly fast. It was fairly lethal. It had its biggest flaw probably was, and then this is important for what we're doing in this, I promise I'm not rambling too much. Its objectives were static. It was just at the end of the game who controlled the most objectives or had the most guys around one objective to dominate control for it. And so what happened in 5th edition is you had a lot of people kind of hang back and just shoot each other constantly, and then 5th turn everyone would pile on the objective and it'd be a draw every time. Just without fail. There would always be a draw. And it really hurt melee armies in that sense because they Tau were going to sit back and shoot anyways, and then you'd have Khorne trying to push through Tau fire, getting annihilated, and then the Tau would just hop on an objective and win, or tie it, even after all the hard work. So one of the things we addressed in this game was that. Games Workshop did as well. 6th edition, they came out with variable objectives, so it was randomized on what's called a D66 chart. So 1-6 is the tens place, D6 is the ones place, and you roll them together, kind of like a shorter percentile. It results in 36 chances. And so I love this idea. We encompassed this into our game. It fixed that. It brought about destructible buildings, which was always kind of funny that a building could hit with Earthshaker rounds day in and day out and would never fall down. Now they could. It got a little complicated on that, and they've refined it a bit in 7th edition, which I liked. 7th edition was a great polish to 6th edition. However, about a year before it ended, Games Workshop got the idea that they were going to really push product sales and promotionals, things like that. So they wanted to start running 2 publication books, like campaign books or supplement books for codexes for like Ultramarines, for example. And that's a pretty tall order. I mean, that's a lot of editing and refining and testing. And at first, they were able to keep up with it, and very quickly it dropped off. This was the edition that Imperial Knights were introduced, and the new toy has historically always been the bit strongest, so that put some bad flavor out there for some people. I'm going to get it, you're selling your product. I still thought it was playable. But what happened is they very quickly fell behind on production, so in order to keep up with what they were going to do, they started to cut some corners, and then they were able to get away with it for a bit, so they cut more corners, and then just the quality fell apart. The old team had been let go, a new team was onboarded to design 8th edition, and you ended up with a system that wasn't rigorously tested. You had inconsistencies in point cost, which continued to 9th, and also in 10th to an extent. And that's just because there's no longer a rigorous formula they're following along. So a couple concerns that we took away from this is were some good things in other editions or some bad things in some other editions, and we wanted to encompass this. So first thing, going into what is alternate 40k rules, it has a facelift of 7th edition. We wanted it to be very comfortable, very familiar for all veteran players. It had a very good feel to the game. It was excellent. We obviously want to be able to play the new models that have released since then, as well as some old models that have been discontinued. And we just really wanted to bring that point formula balance back. So I spent a grand total between 2 projects leading to alternate 40k rules, 200 man hours, rigorously math hammering the point formula before we even started. There wasn't a game played until I got the point formula fixed. It was my idea. It's kind of my brainchild here. So I really ironed that out, and I put every single unit I could think of against every single unit. I had a giant flowchart that has been lost to the space of time, but I'd have Tau Fire Warrior, hand-to-hand or shooting, versus everything I could possibly think of, and percentage chance of successes. And then from there, based off that, I started double checking my point formulas and stuff, and confirming and tweaking until I had a 0.3% variance with 1,000 points of anything. And this is, to clarify, prior to special rules or any exotic like weapon rules or something like that. I wanted to make sure the base game worked. That exhausting project aside, We then started with 3 core books that we wanted to use as solid foundations. One of the things that Games Workshop had done is, as they started cutting corners, they come out with new rule books or supplements. Like the Tyranids had a ridiculous 7th edition codex get released. It was very powerful. Other codexes were being ran against it, and so its power creep wasn't acceptable. It was a little bit better because New Toy wins, but they wanted it to stay just slightly ahead of the game. Well, the original books were just getting massively left behind. So what we do in ours is everything runs against the original books that we produced every time. We make sure it's solid, good feels every time the game plays. Make sure that the balance seems very accurate. If it's not, we just tear it apart and we rebuild the codex. Squats have been rebuilt 3 times now, but I think we finally got it. We're doing the final testing for them, for example. Hopefully a couple more play tests, they should be published as well. Leagues of Votann, for those who aren't familiar with the old term. So that's alternate 40k rules. It's just, at a glance, it's 7th edition, which is perfect. That's what we wanted people to feel comfortable with. And then it leads into its own game that has influence going all the way back to Rogue Trader, 9th edition. It was pretty well established before 10th was even announced at this point. So it doesn't have any elements that 10th brought in or was inspired by. If there's any similarities, it's simply a coincidence. It's also got other influence from other games, Star Wars miniatures, Axis and Allies miniatures. It's got a little influence from Action Clicks. It's got a lot of influence from other games I've written for my friends over the years. This is just the first time I'm actually making sure it's published. But I'll stop boring you there. Alright, so got cut off there on a segment. Apparently switching screens ends the recording of this particular program. So we're learning as we go. But I'm going to have a rulebook pulled up here. We're going to just kind of go through a bit of a skim. If it's in purple, you can probably ignore it. It's for kind of Q&A or advanced rules like modifying terrain on a table during deployment, that kind of thing. It's fairly self-explanatory, so I'm going to kind of skip over it this time around. Sometime I'm sure I'll go over it in a little more in depth. Basically, to build a force, you're going to pick a codex or a supplement. If you build a supplement like Blood Angels, you can use everything in that supplement. But then its parent codex, Space Marines, for example, you can use everything from there and you apply your Blood Angel rules, in this case, chapters, over to those units as well. And the entire army has to comply. So if you have Blood Angels, you can't take Leon L. Johnson. He's Dark Angels. You cannot cross those. And if you're playing like an average chapter, for example, in that case, you can't take Leon L. Johnson. You're not playing Dark Angels. But you can take a lot of other units that aren't Dark Angel specific. And all the Dark Angel specific stuff is in their own supplement, so it makes it easy enough. Just for example, I know we probably have a lot of Space Marine players out there, so they make a good example. So you pick your codex, and the first thing, the absolute minimum you have to do for your army is 1 HQ slot and 2 troop slots. HQ, one of your HQs is going to be your warlord. You can't like make some random master of ordnance a warlord like you can in 8th, 9th, and 10th. He's not in command of the army. Though this is going to be either like a unique HQ or some kind of generic one that you have built yourself, like a tank commander or Space Marine captain. You are allowed up to 2 of them in your army. Only one can be your warlord. It's specifically important for objectives. Troop slots, you're allowed 2 to 6. You just have to have a minimum of 2. They're going to be your staple. They're going to be grabbing a lot of your objectives, holding your back line. And so you don't necessarily have to max out their war gear or anything, but you may need to build an army, some consideration for them in mind, just because they are going to need to get transported around the field if you're going to be hyper aggressive. Those troops aren't particularly fast on their own, that kind of thing. You'll find out as you play, it's pretty easy. For each troop slot you buy, you're allowed advisors. advisors are basically a slotless, so to speak. That's how they used to work. In this, you're allowed 3 advisors for every troop choice you take. This would mean like tech engine seers or apothecaries. They do attach the troop slot as far as the selection goes. They don't have to stay with them during the course of the battle. But in order, if someone has an objective to destroy a squad by shooting, if they don't also kill the apothecary, it doesn't count as a kill yet. So they can hold on to that objective. At the moment the apothecary dies as well, now it counts as a slot removed. Same goes for dedicated transports. They're a little different though. But yeah, you're allowed 3 advisors for every troop choice you take. So if you take all 6 troop choices, you could have up to 18 advisors. That's a lot of points, but it's available. Going into the more yummy units that have more special abilities and things like that, you have 0 to 3 elite slots that you're allowed, 0 to 3 fast attack, 0 to 3 heavy support, 0 to 2 flyers. For every 1,000 points you have in your roster, you're allowed 0 to 1 fortifications. These are things like Eldar webways or specific like bunkers that an Imperial force can take. And then 0 to 1 Lord of War slots. And Lord of Wars are going to be the biggest, the baddest, and the scariest things that your army can bring to the table. Bane blades, that kind of thing. Units of Bloodthirsters. Just as kind of advice, we always recommend you build your army strategy a little bit off your warlord. If you're taking like Imperial Guard, my army of choice, which is going to be a common example, it's in this case, it's I'm taking a tank commander. I'm going to find that I want to have a decent amount of vehicles to support, and I can either castle or be somewhat mobile. But if I take a ton of troop choices and very few tanks to order around or anything like that, tank commander's abilities can be a little bit wasted. And if I want to be mobile and a ton of troops are on foot, they're not going to be particularly fast either. So something just to keep in mind. If you're building for a specific strategy in mind, make sure your warlord fits with it. Or you have a very well-rounded army so he can do whatever he needs to do, and it doesn't compromise your army's integrity or abilities. Just like before, points, everything is point costed. We don't do power levels. Power levels are a joke. Their free war gear is ridiculous. As anyone who's ever played anything, even 8th and 9th and 10th with points, you know that things should cost points. That's one of the things 10th has made fun of right now, is they said they got rid of power levels and then made everything a power level. And they just called it points, which is not how that works. That just, no. You didn't fool anyone for a second there. So what we recommend, just forget that power levels ever existed. Go off points like these two. They're all listed on the data sheet. You don't have to go reference some other third document or anything to build your army. That's very frustrating. I hate doing that personally. Setting up the battlefield, 4 foot by 6 foot for most. If you're less than 1,500 points, maybe 4 by 4. And if you're more than 3,000 points, you might look into a 4 by 8 or bigger as appropriate. Whole living room, shop building, small county, whatever you got to do is appropriate. Just depends how many miniatures you have in your collection, how much plastic crack you're hooked on. For every 1 foot by 1 foot section, we recommend you have a small terrain piece. If you want to put a larger one in there, like a bit bigger of a building that's more than 1 to 2 stories tall, or just kind of has long walls, butt them up together. So if you've got 2 1 foot sections touching, you could take a building and bridge it across the 2 and make it a little bit bigger. Especially if you have like the Imperalis sector terrain kits where you have really large buildings, you could link like 4 of them together just to avoid the table from getting too crowded. But we do want to have a lot of scatter terrain if you're not going to have big features, just that way there's something for units to get behind. We'll get more into how terrain works later in this section. Then initiative, so what you're going to do is you're going to determine who goes first. So you roll a d6 each. Whoever is higher gets to choose first or second. Pros to going first, you get to shoot first. And everything you kill doesn't get to shoot you back. So that's really good. That's very strong, especially in bigger games or small games. Just something to consider. Cons, you're not allowed to declare charges turn 1. You cannot earn any kind of victory points turn 1. You also have to place first so the enemy can base off of you for that. That one's not necessarily really bad per se, but that's just how strong going first is. And we really wanted to punish heavy killing armies that aren't focusing on winning the game through balance. So that way they can be defeated still. This allows everyone to play the game the way they want to, and it doesn't ruin the game like some other editions have. Second player, obviously you get to base off the enemy, so that's nice as a pro. It's not 10th edition where you don't have to wait till your command phase to activate auras and stuff, so you can still get some defensive abilities out there, but you're getting shot overall. And if you have like Imperial Guard issue orders specifically in the shooting phase, a bit limited there, but like you can't get any of those off in time. You can score those points and you can declare charges. So if they want to be hyper aggressive, you can charge them on your terms. If they get really close, really fast, it makes it very open field for the second player. You're just always going to be a little bit behind on getting to shoot. Lastly, when you're starting to pick your sides, roll a d6 for deployment type. You're going to have Dawn of War, which means you're going to have the longest table edge facing each other. And that means you're going to have a shallow deployment zone that's very wide. So this is really good for armies that are very fast-paced, that are looking to flank, get through holes in an enemy line. Especially if it gets a highly elite enemy, it's going to be very hard for them to make it, to protect themselves, so you can't get in behind them and shoot weaker armor facings, that kind of thing. At 4 to 6 is attrition, which is the opposite. You've got the shortest deployment zones, edges going towards each other, and very deep. Like, for example, you're playing a 4x6, you always have 24 inches between you no matter what. So you would have a 24-inch deep deployment zone. That's only, 4 feet wide instead of 6 feet. Now, if you have like a lot of basilisk artillery, this is ideal. You can keep them safe further from the enemy, out of line of sight easier, and you can shell the enemy in a much safer way. Highly recommend you set up the table terrain before you roll, just so there's that maximum randomized element, so no one can power build or try to power focus as much as possible. It just makes the game fun and keeps it balanced. A lot of that uncertainty of war will continue to reflect in the game then. So once you're done with that, you alternate, because first player places the entire army, that's it, except for units that are in reserves or infiltrate. So then first player places an infiltrator if he has any, the second player does so till infiltrators are placed. If someone doesn't have it, the other person can just place them all. Infiltrators go anywhere, that's 12 inches, not next to an enemy. So they can go even to the enemy deployment zone if they left large holes in there, which is more likely to happen with like Dawn of War. To counter infiltrators, some guys have scouts, just as a warning. Yeah, there's a huge rule thing at the end that you can read through at your leisure, but it does help for deployment. Someone with a scout rule can move up to 12 inches after infiltrators are done. And the attacker does all of his scouts at once, not one at a time. And then the second player does, or team, moves all of theirs. And so if someone gets too aggressive with their infiltrators, you can run your scouts right up there point blank range and just cut them down or shoot them down before they get a chance to even do anything. Just something to keep in mind if you want to protect a smaller force of highly specialized individuals. Keep a scout unit around just to have as an extra level of protection. So we get into your battle rounds and turns finally, the part that everyone's been probably waiting for. So we have command phase, movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, assault phase, and the end phase. Command phase is very similar to more current things. First thing that happens in the command phase, all auras you've cast have reset. So in our rules, you'll find in the aura section, They don't affect everybody around them unless they're a true aura. Those are very rare, very expensive point-wise. An aura will target usually yourself and then an enemy unit, unless it's a detriment, just an enemy unit then. I'm sorry, a friendly can also target yours. Like if you have reroll 1 aura for, a Space Marine captain, 1s to hit. It affects him and 1 unit, which could be his own, or it could be an additional unit somewhere nearby. And you can cast it after you roll the dice and see you need to roll the 1s, but before you move to the next stage, like the opponent rolling saves or something like that. You have to cast it at the appropriate time. But you can go, oh, I bombed this, roll this unit, and roll the 1s. Auras resetting, this is good. Next thing that you're going to find that's going to be particularly useful is this is where if you have units that are retreating because they've lost combat resolution and they're falling back, you try to rally them at this point. We got rid of the rules, it just kind of complicated the game further. Where if unit was below half strength, it couldn't rally or had a harder time rallying, it can rally, or you do or you don't. It's also where compulsory moves happen, such as if you fail to rally, the unit will move at its base speed towards its nearest, your middle table deployment zone on the table edge there. It wants to get off the field, get back to safety. It skips its movement phase move because it happens now, it's mandatory. Occasionally that can affect with unit collisions. There's more sections there if you need that, and Q&A in purple, but overall, that's the majority of the command phase. There's very few other things that happen there. There's no stratagems, so you don't worry about strategy points or anything like that. Stratagems are not scaled very well, and there's no way to point cost them or to compare them across armies, and then they vary wildly with scale of battle, such as if you have a trained soldier, you don't have to tell him to overwatch the enemy as they're charging in to kill him. He knows to shoot his gun at the person trying to kill him. That's kind of absurd, so we just did away with them. There was no need for them to be there. Your movement phase, you move up to your movement speed. Surprise, in inches. If you go through anything rough terrain wise, which determine ahead of time what is rough terrain, that takes half your speed to go through that. Or if you have to go up and over an obstacle, you roll for that. If a vehicle tries to roll through, like a building, you have to roll a d6. On a 1, it's stuck for the rest of the game. It doesn't suffer an immobilized result per se, but it gets high centered on some rubble or throws a track, something like that, and it's jammed. In turn, if it passes through and they also hit each other at their base strength, there's more rulebook on that. There's not much else to the movement phase. As a clarifier, you do not advance in the movement phase like you do in 9th or 10th. That's in the shooting phase like it historically used to be going back to 5th, 6th, and 7th edition. Which then we get to the shooting phase. Psychic phase, sorry. Psychic phase, you nominate a caster if you have any. Some armies won't have any, that's fine. You pick a spell you want to cast, you roll 2d6, add your psychic mastery level, and you see if you hit the cast value, like 7+. It's pretty common. For each one you roll, you suffer what's called the Perils of the Warp. Instead of having a complicated Perils of the Warp chart, those were really fun and crunchy, but it really slowed the game down, and some of the results were very detrimental and extreme. So we just simplified it. For each one you roll, it's a mortal wound you suffer. And if you roll double one, so in addition to the 2 mortal wounds, the spell automatically fails, regardless if you meet the value or not. Magic is dangerous, but it's very powerful. Then any enemy psychers that are within 18 inches of the spell being cast or targeted can attempt to deny the witch. In that case, they just roll 2d6. Add your psychic mastery level to it. If you tie or beat it, you stop the spell. A psychic mastery character or unit can cast as many spells per turn as they have levels. And then you can only deny the witch once, regardless of your psychic level, unless they have a special rule that says otherwise. Such as a chief librarian, for example, is an exception. If it's a shooting weapon, it shoots like it does in the shooting section, which we're about to get into. Sometimes they're just abilities. Unlike auras, if the unit that's receiving the aura gets out of range or the person casting it to them is killed, the aura would normally end. Psychic spells almost exclusively say until your next psychic phase. They do stay in effect. So there's some chance of failure. They're discounted for that. But even if the psychic caster is killed, the abilities stay on the field. So, little pros and cons and trade-offs there if you're trying to decide your army. Shooting phase, you advance d6 inches, and you skip shooting, or you shoot. There's certain weapon rules out there and stuff that we'll get into, such as like heavies and stuff like that can make it very detrimental to move and shoot potentially. But generally, you are making shots, and let's say you're making 5 shots. We did like the 7th edition template. I did prefer, however, not to have a conversion chart just to shoot with the basic rifleman. That didn't make sense. So we did take the formula used in 8th, 9th, and 10th, the format of having like a guardsman say 4+ ballistic skill, a 4 or higher hits. It's very simple. It's very clean. It's the same getting into it essentially at the end. It just has a better facelift on it than it did before. So what we're going to do now, let's say you get 10 shots, you roll 10 dice for each 4+, you hit the target. Simple enough. As far as wounding someone, your strength and toughness, I like the simpler system of if it's the same, it's a 4+. If the strength is equal to the toughness. If the strength is higher than the toughness, it's 3+. If it's double or more the toughness, it's a 2+. And then on the converse, if strength is less than the toughness of the target of the weapon, it's a 5+. And if it's half or less, then it's a 6+ wound. 6s always succeed. This way you can still chink a vehicle to death. We made vehicles significantly more tougher and more resilient than they were in 7th edition, though. We kept a lot of elements like the wound counts with some tweaking from 8th and 9th edition. Combine that with armor facings, they can be very resilient, and it works really well. So we just went ahead, we're rolling with it. 6s happen. It's 40k. There's some really crazy powerful weapons out there. You might actually clip a battle tank and damage it. You never know. If you got a template weapon, you do something a little different. Flame templates, you just put the end of the flame, the long, skinny side of it, tapers up to the weapon barrel, and you lay it over. It cannot touch any friendly models. If you can't place it without touching friendly models, you can't use it for friendly fire reasons. It is allowed to touch the model casting it because some weapons are recessed and the flame's arcing or something like that. It doesn't move. It just, whatever units is touching over, it automatically hits them. You just move to rolling to wound. In the case of templates, anywhere from 3-inch to the Apocalypse Barrage or the 15-inch template, you just roll 2d6 dice and you consult the chart if you can directly see your opponent. And like before, a guardsman reduces the scatter by 3 inches. It's just inverted from how it was worded in 7th edition. And whatever it lands on, friend or foe, cannot initially be placed on friend, but if it scatters into friendly forces, oh well, the commissar ordered a barrage and Timmy got unlucky. Whatever's underneath it, even partially, is considered a hit, and you roll to wound like normal. In the event of indirect fire weapons, you instead just add the ballistic skill to it. Has to have the rule indirect, like a basilisk. Instead of having it once again in the conversion chart, we can just reference the ballistic skill the way it is. 2d6 plus 3 if you're firing without line of sight, that kind of thing. And wherever it lands is where it lands. There's a direct hit on that die. If it rolls a direct hit, all scattered die, like the numerical scatter is completely ignored. A direct hit will always be a direct hit. It's a 1/3 chance. That includes indirect fire. It's ridiculous that you couldn't accurately fire indirectly. We do it all the time. They were doing it back with cannons, back in the black and powder ages, so it's a thing. Also keeps the game simple. Alright, so that's easy enough. If you hit a vehicle with a blast template, you would first center it on whatever facing from the vehicle using 90 degrees. So if you have a square tank like this, you can just 90 degree it and see whatever it falls in from the tank's perspective, not the shooters. It's very misleading from the shooters. And you place it in the center of that facing that's relevant. Even if you can't technically see that portion, just makes it easier, simpler. You roll scatter from there like normal. Wherever it is considered landing for facings, look at the center hole and draw it as close as line to the center of the vehicle. Whatever facing that hit, that's where the facing is hit. Or in the case of Flame Template, just the middle line. Use your best judgment. It's a friendly game. Remember, it's a friendly game. There's a couple of odd weapons. The 15-inch and the Apocalypse Barrage are their own thing. They're in here. I'm not going to bore you with it for the details starting out. We already went over Rolling to Wound. If you're penetrating a vehicle, they don't have a toughness value. You take the strength of the weapon and you add a d6. If you tie the vehicle, or it's less and you roll the 6, which always succeeds, it's considered a glance. A glance against a tank just results in the vehicle potentially needing to roll its armor save, which we're about to get into. If it's higher than the armor value, it's considered a penetration. There is no armor save. It went straight through the vehicle. This means that vehicles are really resistant to small arms fire. They are not resistant to heavy artillery and that kind of thing. Any ability allows you to reroll the wound, also allows you to reroll to penetrate. Just saving on redundant wording, usually. That's where that comes from. Once you've been wounded, you consider the AP of the weapon. So if it says like a crack missile has AP 3+, anyone who has a stat SB 3+ or worse, higher, 4, 5, 6, or dash, they just don't get that save. It's going to bypass it. If it's lower than, they still get their full save. There's none of the subtraction that's going on. So a Terminator with a Storm Shield gets hit with a crack missile. He has a save of 2+, thanks to the Storm Shield modifier. He gets a 2+ armor save. His armor and defenses are uncaring. A real world example for this, I can shoot you with a brass solid 9mm. Yes, it will go through a soft vest. It should bypass a soft level 3A vest. It doesn't matter when it hits that type 4 plate. It is going to chip the steel a little bit, but it's not getting through. It does not in any way compromise it unless you just hit it a lot of times, and that's what the save value represents, is it failing. That's all we're going for. So it's kind of an older style of play. Veteran players are going to recognize it and love or hate it. I personally find I love it, especially with the elite system, not big fused elite slots, but the level of elite that certain units are, like Space Marines. We really wanted to drive that home. You're going to find that it works a lot better for that. Like Space Marines in this edition are much, much better in alternate 40k rules. They easily, one Marine can cost half a squad of guardsmen or more, and can fight almost a whole squad of guardsmen if left to his own devices in an ideal circumstances. More to the lore. We got as close as we could. We'll get into that when we get into the Space Marine Codex. Other defenses from shooting that you can do is you can choose to go to ground. Some weapons, like organs or pinning, can force you to take pinning test. You can just choose to be pinned. It gives you a cover save of 6+ if you're out in the open, or if you're in cover of some kind, it improves by 1 to a maximum of 2+. 1s always fail. In everything. Including penetrating a vehicle. There are pros and cons being pinned, which we'll get into. It's in the rulebook too. Basically, you skip your next movement phase and you risk staying pinned if you fail your leadership test. It can be a really bad thing, so only do it if you got good leadership or some character that can force you to rally, because you might screw yourself over if you're not careful. Cover saves are calculated very simply. Out of all the different terrain pieces out there, fortified cover offers a 3+ like bunkers. Buildings offer 4. Tree lines offer 4 usually. Something like a fence or a hedgerow, barbed wire, that's only going to offer a 5+. You just take whatever's the best out of that. And then in the event of you have a rule or you've gone to ground, that improves it by 1. And of course, you can choose just to shoot the terrain if you want to remove it from somebody. That's how you flush out like stealthy scouts or something like that, is to just shoot the trees down. Their stats are listed in here. If any templates ever touch terrain, you do have to roll against it as well, whether you want to or not. There's a good chance that you start blowing trees out with a heavy artillery very quickly and then open a field up and it's suddenly not the best cover as you thought it was. There are some weapon types here. It's going to be like your rifles and things. This part can be kind of important. They're all going to have something listed. Rapid fire is where most of your rifles sit. It says rapid fire 1, you get 1 shot within your range, such as 24 inches. If you're within half range, you double it, so you get 2. So a storm bolter goes 2, rapid fire 2. If you're in half range, it gets 4 shots. For example, assault weapons are going to be like flamethrowers and grenade launchers. You are allowed to declare charges after firing them. Not where currently I believe you can fire them at a -1 while advancing. Can't do that. Whoever thought you could fire a grenade launcher while sprinting has never done so in their life. Assault weapons are going to be very critical for a lot of your melee units. If you want to get into melee, don't take weapons that are going to make you decide if you shoot or melee. If you want to balance list, that's a different story, but if you very much want to get into melee, plan accordingly. Heavy weapons, if they're on infantry and they move, they can only do snapshots. And there's a couple other things that can trigger snapshots in the game, such as being pinned and having not rallied in the prior phases. Snapshots only hit on 6s. It's called that because it mostly affects guns. There's some rare instances, such as fear, that can cause it in melee. Only a 6 hits, or it doesn't matter how good your skill is or what modifiers you have. The only thing that helps is rerolls at that point, if you have an aura that does that. You rolled wound like normal going forward. There's a chart in here for templates and how many dice they get and the maximum they can score, because one of the things I find crazy in 10th edition, for example, in 8th and 9th, a Baneblade cannon can machine gun a captain to death on the open field. No. You can hit him once really well. It's a big cannon, that's it. And so we have rules to avoid that from being slipped through on the, basically meaning you can only hit as many targets as you would if you had the template, or it's in the target unit. To put it simply, you should read through it if you got questions on it. There are pistol weapons. They're allowed to charge after shooting them as well. And if you're infantry, they're allowed to fire in your melee only on your shooting phase. Vehicles can do that normally. There's rules for that. We'll get in further in there, a little more detailed breakdown. Pistols are designed to be used in close quarters. That's what they're there for. And then last is grenades. First thing is, a grenade also counts as an assault weapon for declaring charges. You're allowed to do so. More importantly with them, if someone's in cover, you don't take the penalty for charging somebody in cover. It's very critical for units that want to get into melee but don't want to fight last, because the other enemy units might not be too bad at it and could take a pretty good beating on you. Make sure you have somebody in there with grenade. You just need at least one. Then we get to the assault phase. You declare charges. If you nominate all the guys that can legally declare a charge that you want, you can pre-measure. You can measure out 12 inches. You're like, I want to charge this person. You declare them all. Then the defender declares his Overwatch, which is snapshots. Pistols, Overwatch on a 5+ specifically. Another reason that it can be particularly useful for their points. Also means well-furnished armies like Space Marines that have rifles, sidearms, and combat knives, and grenades. They have something for every situation. Helps drive that elite factor and that flexible factor up. We'll get more into that with each codex as you go. Some codexes are designed for that. So after all Overwatches are resolved, once again, templates have their thing. They're described in there. Then you just simply nominate them in the order you declared them. And you roll 2d6, see if you make it. If you make it, you move them up. At this point, they just move. Each model in the unit cannot move more than what was rolled. So only even one may be in base contact. That's okay. If you fail, they just don't move at all. And the Overwatch, if any happen, was just a free shooting from the opponent. It was not the best odds of hitting somebody. Then at that point, because the player's turn it is, nominates one of these combats, whether it be ongoing or new. The only way, by the way, just to enter combat, the only way to do so is by charging. There's no other way about it. This combat will be nominated, and then his units that are activated, like by initiative order, they're going to go ahead and they're going to move 3 inches in a consolidation move, and they have to move into base contact with the unit they're with. They cannot touch another unit. They can only touch this one, and they do the best they can. Everyone within 1 inch of a guy who's in base contact is allowed to fight. Section's got more on that there. If it's an ongoing melee where no one charged, you just do it by initiative order instead. Charging trumps it, and then a weapon with slow trumps it as well. Someone with slow weapons still consolidates on their initiative value. It happens. It's not too common or it's important, but that does. At some point, it is completely cut down. It could terminate melee prematurely because a different unit went and annihilated someone. There's more detail in there. It's a lot of exposition for weird cases or clarifiers. If you win combat, the opponent has, whoever wins combat, the other units that all lost individually take a leadership test minus how much they lost by. You count how many wounds each side inflicted. That's how you determine who won. If it's a tie, you don't roll and everything's fine. If a unit passes, they stay in combat. If they fail, they immediately have to fall back. Assuming no other enemy units remain in combat to keep them tied up, enemy units can then choose to pursue them. You have to do so before the rolls are made here. If you want to restrain yourself, you have to roll leadership tests to not try to chase them down. If you fail, you just chase them down the best you can. If you pass, you stay put, and you just move 3 inches as a consolidation. The enemy unit falls back 2d6 inches towards their nearest center table edge that they can. That's where safety is. They're going to move around terrain that they can't pass over. They'll climb over where they need to. Vehicles and monsters ram through stuff. There's rules in it here. Basically, you cause impact hits. Vehicles could still be stuck. Vehicles are allowed to go forwards or reverse that direction. It's still a somewhat orderly retreat. They're just needing to disengage rather hurriedly. And then it resumes the whole falling back compulsory moves in your command phase. The opponent that is pursuing rolls 2d6. If he ties or gets higher than you rolled, he's allowed to rejoin combat and just is considered ongoing melee later on. He just moves his units. The fight resumes. There's no charging or anything that happens. And if he rolls less than, even if he could technically reach it, he has to stay at least 1 inch away from the enemy. He just does best moves possible to be 1 inch from the enemy, straightly behind them. That can happen if a unit's surrounded. It doesn't happen too often, but when it does happen, you just keep them behind him the best you can. And then last is the end phase. Not really a lot happens here, except for if you scored victory points during your turn, or the opponent's turn, sometimes you can do that too. You just make a tally of that. You make a note and you mark out the objectives that you earned. There's 3 every turn. If it's battle round 5, roll a d6. On a 4+, the game continues. Otherwise, it ends. You do the same with 6, 7. Turn 8 will always be the end, no matter what you do. That's really the basics of the game. I didn't forget to mention the command phase earlier, the D66 chart. So there is a randomized objectives in this game, much like 6th and 7th edition. I love it. It kept away from a lot of issues of 5th edition, where people just jumped on all at the end at the very last, possible moment. They would jump on the objectives and it would just be a draw every time. It was very frustrating. D66 chart is 1 D6 is a tens place, 1 is a 1 place. It means 36 random options. You never know what your objectives are going to be going into the game, so it makes you bring a balanced list, or you risk losing. If you bring a very hyper-focused list, there's a good chance it may not end well for you. In your command phase, you're allowed to get rid of 1, whether you earned it this turn or you had it from prior turns. Otherwise, as you earn objective markers, you mark them off, and you don't roll new ones until your next command phase. That end phase there tied it in there. There's a couple of unit types out there. I'll let you go through on your own. Pretty straightforward. There's a vehicle damage chart for when it's penetrated. That's how they take extra wounds, because they're not normally affected by certain rules like Monster Bane. You'll see very common and very heavy weapons. Once again, that's in the index here. The objective markers, just because we've got it pulled up here, 11 through 36, 6 of each, are just objective markers 1 through 6. You cannot repeat them, so you can't have objective 11 twice, but you can have objective 11, 21, and 31, all of which are objective 1. So having transports or outflank, deep strike, ways of getting around with a infantry unit so they can score the objective, because no one else can do it unless it has objective secured. Infantry are the core of the game. You have to remember 50% of these objectives are objective 1 through 6. After that, you get into some more randomized things. Still can be objective marker based, such as controlling twice as that of the opponent, controlling 3, controlling every single one on the battlefield, controlling 1 outside of your deployment zone. Just all things to consider there. There's some for killing enemy units, killing a warlord. They're all pretty self-explanatory. Getting into terrain, basically buildings have 10 wounds per level. It's a toughness 7. That's the only stat. They don't have a save or anything like that. They're just like ruins. It gets more into this, and that's per level, and as buildings are destroyed, the top level becomes inhabitable. You go to the bottom level because of ease and use. But that's the majority of how you play the game, and after that, it's just got some clarifiers and then a whole bunch of the specialty rules, like pinning and how they work, what they do. It's very self-explanatory there. Try not to ramble too much on this. I didn't want to info dump too bad. Basically, it comes down to grab the codex, build yourself an army using your points, sign ahead of time to save time. Hey, we're playing 2,000 points today. Okay. We're just going to get that built. We're going to set out terrain pieces one at a time, or the host sets up, however you wish to do that. And you'll play your game. You're going to go for your objective markers. You're going to try to get more victory points. It is entirely possible to be wiped off the battlefield and still win if you ran a really good objective game. The opponent gets to keep going, trying to score objectives until the end of the game. But, I mean, there's plenty of times I've seen it happen where they couldn't catch up just because it kept rolling killing objectives or didn't have the ability to score objective markers, and it hindered them. If you have questions, of course, please reach out to us. I appreciate you listening to this video. I'm going to get some going with breakdowns of a lot of codexes, their specialty units, their flavors, and how they prefer, their play styles. If you're not sure what arm you want to get into, whether you've never played Warhammer 40k, you can't find what lore that you like the most, or it's overwhelming and you just want to worry about the tabletop side, or maybe you just want to run a strong game, a bit of a power play game, and you need to know which one's going to fit that play style the best. Anyways, appreciate you watching. Sorry it took so long to get this video recorded again and put up here. Sorry about the camera quality, as I'm trying to bypass the camera and mic issues. We look forward to hearing from you. Love hearing about your games, whether it be alternate rules or not. I love battle reports. I love everyone's imagination, getting into the narratives. I love the paint jobs. Reach out to our Facebook page with any of that if you ever want to, and we'll see you on the table.